I wasn't always this version of myself. There was a time I'd look down at my hands and wonder if I'd ever be more than a tool, something to be used, something that blended into someone else's ambition. I worked in the shadows, at someone else's schedule, at someone else's mercy. Back then, no one remembered my name unless they needed something travel booked, wife placated scandals, buried documents signed. And I was good at it. Too good. I became the woman you could trust with your secrets, mostly because you never thought I had a voice to use them. But that's the thing about people like me. We remember everything. I started at Wilcox and Marston when I was 29. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even meant to be long-term. They needed someone discreet, precise, and able to smile through being ignored. I needed a job with health insurance. I thought 3 months, maybe 6. Then I started listening. I don't mean just hearing. I mean listening. To tones. To the way a partner's voice faltered when he was hiding something. To who didn't look people in the eyes. To who flinched when you said auditor. That was my secret weapon. I didn't chase influence. I let it trip over itself in front of me. By year 3, I had a Rolodex of quiet leverage. Not because I was trying to collect dirt, but because no one hides things better than successful men. And no one notices things faster than the woman who sharpens their pencils. There was the VP who inflated client numbers and routed funds through 3 side companies. The partner who left hotel receipts in his jacket pocket, never knowing his wife called every week to plan his birthday sweet and unsuspecting. The associate who cried in the copy room after shredding something she knew she shouldn't have. And I was the one who brought her tea, not questions. I never exposed any of them. Not then. Because when you live in the shadows long enough, you learn leverage is louder than truth. Still, people looked through me. One partner used to call me Viv, even though I hated it. Another would snap his fingers if I didn't answer fast enough. One, the worst, would schedule my vacation days for me. Every time they underestimated me, I smiled and made a note. Not just mentally. I had a folder. A physical one. Locked in a drawer. Names, dates, emails, copies. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. But I knew this. One day I'd need it. And when I did, I wouldn't ask for anything. I'd take it. It started to shift the day Leo Ambrose fell. He was Wilcox's golden boy. Ivy League, full of swagger, beloved by the board. Until one morning, I walked in to find the office buzzing. He'd been caught in an accounting oversight involving a missing $500,000. People panicked. Legal called. The board was livid. And there I was, holding the backup server log he'd forgotten to erase. I could have exposed him. Instead, I made one phone call to him, told him what I had, told him what it meant. And then I offered him one option. You resign quietly, or I hand this over. Not both. He left by noon. The firm never knew why, but people started looking at me differently after that. Later that day, Wilcox stepped into my office, first time ever. Vivian, he said, my full name for once. You've always been more than you let on. I didn't answer. He nodded. That's a compliment. I still didn't answer. He looked at me like he wanted to say more. Instead, he walked out. But the next morning, I noticed my name was no longer listed under administrative support. They had created a new title for me, Executive Operations Liaison. No one knew what it meant, but they stopped snapping their fingers. And I stopped booking their flights. I was no longer the one following orders. I was the one who quietly held the ledger. And believe me, that was only the beginning. The funny thing about serving coffee is, people forget you're even there. They talk in front of you like you're part of the wallpaper. But me, I was always listening. Always watching. I memorized office door codes before they changed. I knew who preferred oat milk before it hit the order sheet. I could predict who'd be promoted by who was invited to Friday drinks and who wasn't. Power doesn't announce itself in firms like Wilcox and Marston. It whispers. It protects itself behind casual cruelty and expensive cologne. and I served it daily in ceramic mugs with notes they thought I didn't read. In those early years, no one feared me. That was their mistake. They thought my silence meant ignorance. But silence for someone like me was a gathering storm. By my third year, I had a second desk at home, one no one knew about. That's where I kept everything: names, birthdays, suspicious transfers, late-night office meetings that didn't align with calendar entries. I called it the archive. Not to destroy anyone. Not yet. But I'd learned from women smarter than me. Women who'd raised me, who'd taught me power never arrives at your doorstep. You build it brick by brick. In the dark, if you have to. And I was building. The men at the top never saw me as a threat. One used to wink when I passed by like I was in on some joke. Another, Jackson Pruitt, once handed me a thumb drive for safekeeping, didn't even ask if I had encryption. He'd later claim his laptop had been hacked. And I'd remember that thumb drive still in my desk. They weren't careless because they were stupid. They were careless because they thought I was safe. Disposable. A yes woman in pencil skirts who disappeared when meetings started. But I never disappeared. I was always just off to the side, absorbing everything. I remember one winter evening, late after a partner Christmas party. I was cleaning up glassware because of course the staff didn't show, and guess who stayed? That's when I overheard Marston and two senior partners discussing a merger. Illegal as hell. Leaked ahead of schedule. Someone was profiting behind the scenes. I didn't move. Didn't cough. Didn't exist. Just listened. That night, I went home and added 3 new tabs to the archive. That was the first time I realized I had a choice. I could stay silent and survive. Or stay silent and win. You see, they taught me everything not through mentorship but through their negligence. I learned how to structure shell companies from watching how they hid their own bonuses. I learned who feared audit season and who couldn't keep track of how many phones they carried. One even had a mistress listed under consultant. Guess who approved her payments? I didn't judge. I didn't warn. I just collected. Not out of vengeance, at least not yet. Out of insurance. Because in a world that values your obedience more than your opinion, leverage is life. And I plan to live. One night, Jackson Pruitt cornered me by the elevator. Too much whiskey. Too much ego. "You think you're smarter than us," he said, slurring. I smiled. "You think I care what you think." He laughed like it was a joke. It wasn't. The next week, his assistant accidentally sent me an internal memo with enough dirt to end him. I didn't use it. I just saved it. I wasn't in a rush. Because when you move in, silence, timing is everything. And mine was getting sharper by the hour. Some assistants spend their careers trying to move up. I spent mine building underneath. I didn't want to be them. I wanted to be the one they called when it all came crashing down. The woman with the answer. The backup. The exit plan. And when that day came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd just raise my hand and let them come running. Because I'd already spent years learning the most dangerous truth in that building. The person who knows the system best is the one who was invisible inside it. And I was done being invisible. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from being useful but never seen. I swallowed it for years, smiled through it, burned through it. That pain, it taught me how to wait and how to win. My name echoed only when something went wrong. "Vivian, can you fix this client file?" "Vivian, reschedule my meeting again." "Vivian, I need you to talk to my wife and tell her I'm stuck in DC. I was a translator, a fixer, a shield." They assumed my silence meant loyalty. But it wasn't loyalty. It was storage. Every lie they handed me, I filed it away. And I never forgot the ones that came wrapped in condescension. I learned to swallow fire the day I was blamed for someone else's mistake and punished for fixing it. One of the junior partners, Ian Greer, had sent the wrong report to a major client. It almost cost us the deal. He panicked, said I must have attached the wrong file, said I needed more training. No one asked me what happened. No one even looked at the timestamp, which clearly showed his name on the upload. Instead, I got a warning letter in my HR file. He got promoted 4 months later. And I added him to the archive, and I smiled at his assistant every morning. What they didn't know was that while I was being blamed, I was also becoming necessary. That same client, I built a relationship with their executive assistant behind the scenes, fed her details, learned who really held decision-making power. By the time we were renegotiating the deal, she came to me, not Ian, and I made sure the credit went elsewhere. He didn't fall that year, but he started slipping. That was the beginning of what I call the long undoing. I didn't take them down with drama. That's the difference between revenge and strategy. Revenge wants noise. Strategy waits. I didn't need them to feel humiliated. I just needed them to feel uncertain. One partner forgot whether he'd told me something. Another asked, "You didn't mention this to anyone, right?" Another left a meeting early when I looked at him too long. They started second-guessing their own memories, and that's when I knew they were scared. Not of me screaming, not of me leaking, of me knowing. One night, Wilcox himself called me from a private number. He never used to call. "Vivian," he said, "I need your help." His voice was smaller than usual, slower. A personal investment had gone sideways. A press leak was imminent. He didn't want PR. He wanted control. I listened, took notes. He asked, "Can I trust you?" I said, "Always." But I didn't erase the call log. I didn't delete the emails. I added them to the archive, not out of spite, out of preparation. Because people in power panic when they're exposed, and panicked people make mistakes. A few weeks later, he made one. He tried to shift blame for the leak to another assistant, an innocent one, a single mom new to the company. I stepped in, presented a memo I wasn't supposed to have. Wilcox turned red. "I don't remember this," he muttered. I looked him in the eyes. "I do." That was the first time he ever apologized to anyone in public. That woman kept her job. And I became untouchable. But it wasn't just power I wanted, it was structure. A system I controlled piece by piece, where people didn't realize they were already moving on my board. I started playing kingmaker behind the scenes, helped some rise, helped others fall quietly. When I referred someone to a project, they got it. When I didn't reply to an email, that deal went cold. And no one could trace it back to me, because I still smiled. Still served coffee sometimes. Still stayed late. Still invisible. But I was no longer holding fire. I was the fire. They called him Golden Boy. Leo Ambrose. Tall, charming, Harvard-educated, the youngest partner ever promoted at Wilcox and Marston. He glowed. He dazzled. He walked like he owned the air around him. And for years, everyone else let him. But I knew better. Because I was the one who handled his receipts. The one who watched him take more from the firm than he ever gave back. And eventually, he slipped. They always do. The fall began with something small. A last-minute travel change to Belize that didn't match any client itinerary. I flagged it. Internally. Quietly. No response. Then came 2 dinner reimbursements in the same city, same night, different names. I forwarded them back to him. Still no response. So I logged them, highlighted the pattern, waited. He thought he was clever, spreading the charges across different cost centers using junior associates' codes, booking flights on his own cards and filing for cash reimbursements. But clever doesn't beat consistent. And I am nothing if not consistent. One Thursday morning, I came into the office early, always early, and found Leo's door ajar. Inside, he was pacing, shirt half tucked in collar askew, phone pressed so tight to his ear I could see the white at his fingertips. "I don't care what the invoice says," he snapped. Tell them to eat the overage. I'm not paying out of pocket. He saw me startled. Covered the phone. Vivian coffee? I nodded, but I was already pulling a mental tab October 3rd. Defensive. Panicked. Expense tension. I went to the break room. Took my time. When I came back, he was gone. His office smelled like sweat and expensive panic. A week later, a junior finance analyst brought me a file. It was in your inbox by mistake, she said. It wasn't. Leo's name was all over it. And so was an internal memo warning of potential audit exposure from multiple reimbursements. I read it once, then again. Then I printed one copy, folded it, slid it into the back of the archive, and waited. Leo's unraveling took 4 months. He still smiled, still charmed, still held court in board meetings like a golden idol. But I watched the shine fade. He got short with staff, snapped at interns, avoided me altogether. Then came the internal audit. He tried to stop it, said it was routine. No need to dig into partner accounts. That's when I knew it was time. I didn't send the file. I didn't leak anything. I just left the folder labeled Audit Reconciliation on the CFO's desk and scheduled his meeting for 10:30. By 11:00, the whispers had begun. By 4:00, Leo had resigned for personal reasons. No one asked how it happened. But 2 days later, Wilcox stopped me in the hall. He didn't thank me. He didn't smile. He just said, "You always were ahead of the curve," and walked off. That night, I walked home through the city like the air itself had changed. Not warmer, not softer, but clearer, cleaner. I wasn't afraid of them anymore, because they weren't above me. They were vulnerable to me. And Leo, he called 3 weeks later, asked to meet. I agreed. We met in a hotel lounge dimly lit, full of soft jazz and softer lies. He looked smaller, thinner, not golden anymore. "You did this," he said quietly. I sipped my drink. "No, Leo." "You did." He leaned in. "You could have warned me." I smiled. "I did. Twice." "You didn't listen." He shook his head, more sad than angry. "You were always watching," he murmured. I set my glass down. "That's what assistants do." Then I stood. "Don't worry. I won't ruin you," I said. "But I won't forget you either." And I never did. Back at the office, everything changed. My desk stayed the same. My title didn't. But now executives paused when I entered. They copied me on emails without being asked. And if I disagreed subtly, silently, they rechecked their facts. Because now they knew. They'd seen what I could do. To Leo. To them. To anyone who forgot that the quiet woman in the corner didn't need to shout to change the room. She just needed to wait. Until the right man fell. There's a moment, subtle, almost unnoticeable, when power changes hands. It doesn't come with a promotion, or a speech, or applause. It's a glance, a hesitation, a deferential silence that wasn't there before. For me, that moment came the morning after Leo resigned. Wilcox walked past my desk, nodded once, just once, and kept going. No orders, no condescension, just recognition. The balance had shifted, and everyone felt it. That same day, I got an email from Trisha in legal, subject line lunch. We'd spoken before, of course, but always professionally, in passing, not like this. I agreed. She chose a quiet spot. Corner booth, white linen napkins, no overhead music. "You're not like them," she said, stirring her tea. "No," I agreed, "I'm not." She leaned in. "But you understand them better than they understand themselves." It wasn't a question. It was a test. And I passed. Trisha became the first to treat me like more than a function. She shared things. How the partners delayed compliance when it suited them. How HR was pressured to keep certain complaints buried. How the board feared exposure more than failure. She didn't say it outright, but I understood. The system was cracking, and people like me, we were the only ones who could feel the tremors early. That's when I stopped playing defense. I started directing the game. First, I offered suggestions to leadership phrased gently like soft pillows beneath a hammer. I think we may want to revisit how Jackson handles onboarding. There's been noise. 2 weeks later, Jackson was reassigned. Then I proposed a morale audit of middle management, something the staff had quietly begged for. 3 department heads were rotated out. No one questioned who had initiated it. They assumed it came from above. But it hadn't. It had come from beside them. From me. And the thing was, I didn't need the credit. That was my edge. I wasn't building a name. I was building a lever. Every time someone listened to me, even without knowing, I pulled that lever just a little higher, until they started coming to me on their own. One Friday afternoon, Wilcox called me into his office. He was tired. Tense. "Vivian, there's talk of a quiet restructuring. I need eyes in the room I can trust." I didn't answer immediately. He nodded as if that was enough. "I'll make it worth your time." It already was. The next week, I sat in on my first board advisory session. No one introduced me. No one asked why I was there. They just accepted it. And that silence, that instant acceptance, told me everything I needed to know. The balance wasn't shifting anymore. It had shifted. And I was the one holding the weight. Of course, some didn't like it. There were whispers. Old school executives murmuring about boundaries, too much access, she's just an assistant. I didn't argue. I let them complain. And I let them sign the memos that tied them to their own bad decisions. One by one, they realized I wasn't just an observer. I was the link. The one who knew which contract was missing a page, which timestamp proved who leaked what, which signature contradicted which testimony. And I never said it out loud. I never raised my voice. I just made sure that when something went wrong, they looked to me first for answers, not blame. That's the kind of power no title can buy. It's the kind they give you when they're afraid to lose you. Later that month, I ran into Jackson in the elevator. He smiled, thin and bitter. Still playing puppet master, I smiled back. Only when the puppets keep walking off cliffs. He didn't respond. The doors opened, and I walked out first. By the end of that year, my official title hadn't changed. But behind the scenes, everyone knew. When decisions needed to be made, when reputations were on the line, when trust was too expensive to gamble, they came to me, because I wasn't part of the chain. I was the chain. Every link forged in silence, now strong enough to wrap around anyone who forgot that even shadows have teeth. And I was done pretending I didn't know how to bite. I never called it revenge, not even privately. It was survival. It was precision. It was the natural consequence of being underestimated for too long. And by the time they realized what I could do, it was already too late. The whispers began after Leo fell, but they took form when I turned down a promotion. Wilcox had called me into his office, offered me a formal new title, Director of Executive Strategy. I smiled. "Thank you," I said. "But I'm more effective without a spotlight." He paused, studied me. Smart. That's when the rumors really began. Why won't she move up? Who is she protecting? Who does she really work for? They all got it wrong. I wasn't working for anyone. I was working around everyone. With each meeting, I attended each file, I edited each whisper. I heard in hallways they thought were empty. I built something. An empire not in name, but in leverage. They called me an assistant. But what I really became was the firewall between exposure and destruction. They feared that, even if they'd never admit it out loud. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I recognized the voice immediately. Gregory Blake, head of corporate compliance. Technically my superior. Definitely unaware how much I had on him. "Vivian," he began, "I was hoping to get your take on something sensitive." That was how it always started, requests wrapped in flattery. He was in trouble, discreetly accused of covering for an ethics violation in his department. It hadn't gone public yet. I told him I'd look into it. He sighed. Thank you. I know I can trust you. And I smiled even though he couldn't see it. Because that was the game. They trusted me because they had to. Because not trusting me was worse. By then I had influence over hiring lists, over internal conflict resolutions, over legal memos passed between partners at midnight. I never asked for authority. I earned it by being the one no one could afford to cross. You want a file to disappear? I know where it's stored. You want a transfer processed without a signature? I know who looks the other way. You want to know what your competition is planning? I saw the slide deck before they printed it. And the moment I stopped asking why they needed things, they started asking how much I already knew. That's when the second kind of whisper began. Not the petty ones, the fearful ones. She's dangerous. She could end us if she wanted. Don't piss her off. I never acknowledged it, but I let it fester, let it bloom, because fear was useful. Fear made them listen when I told them to clean up a mess. Fear made them sign without reading. Fear made them think twice before using my name casually. And more than once I heard them say, "She's just the assistant." To which someone else would respond, "Yeah, the assistant." But even fear has its limits. Some people test boundaries because they think they're untouchable. Enter Miriam Cole. She was the firm's newest senior partner, sharp, elegant, and ambitious enough to burn anyone in her way. She didn't fear me, not at first. She called me dear in meetings, reassigned interns without consulting me, changed formatting on documents I had already finalized, and laughed about it. I said nothing, but I began to watch her closely. And one day I found it a conflict of interest buried in her last 4 quarterly reports, a fund she claimed to recuse herself from, while still collecting consulting fees from its parent company. Not illegal, but damning. I waited until she tried to block a promotion for a woman in compliance, someone I'd quietly mentored. Then I acted. I sent a single email, 3 bullet points. No accusation, just facts. To Trisha, to HR, to the Oversight Committee. Miriam was reevaluated 2 weeks later, moved to a non-client-facing role. Never once suspected where the storm had come from, and I didn't change my walk, my smile, my tone. But that week, 3 different men stopped calling me Viv. After that, it became understood Vivian Harrow doesn't speak loudly. She doesn't threaten. She doesn't argue. She documents. She remembers. She waits. And if you cross her, you won't even feel the knife. You'll just bleed. They used to say I was the assistant who made things run smoothly. Now they say I'm the one who can make them stop. Careers. Departments. Reputations. And they're right. But I'm not interested in destruction for its own sake. That's amateur work. I'm interested in shaping the game. Quietly. Permanently. So that the next woman who walks into that firm unnoticed and underestimated won't have to wait 20 years to be heard. Some people fight for every inch, every credit, every spotlight. Not me. Let them win the battles. I was too busy taking the war. I learned early that power isn't always about being right. It's about being indispensable. Let the executives bicker over who closed the quarterly deal. Let them argue over who delivered the pitch or who smoothed over the client meltdown. I knew the real truth. It was me. I was the one who booked the flight that avoided the PR scandal. I was the one who scheduled the dinner that saved the merger. I was the one who whispered, "Wait until Monday, he's calmer after the weekend." But did I take credit? Never. I just filed it away. And slowly they stopped fighting me. Because no one wants to destroy the one person who knows where their safety net is tied. There were times I could have exposed them, moments when their arrogance was a noose they knotted themselves. But I didn't pull. Not right away. That wasn't my strategy. I let them believe they'd won, because false security makes for better leverage. Let them feel powerful, they reveal more that way. Let them celebrate too early, they forget to check their blind spots. And guess who always stood in their blind spot? There was one project, a high-profile acquisition, the biggest we'd seen in years. Two executives were battling for the lead. Emails turned into power plays. Meetings turned into turf wars. I stayed out of it. On the surface. Behind the scenes, I fed both sides just enough to keep the friction alive. Not maliciously, strategically. Because while they obsessed over who got the crown, they forgot to vet the numbers. And when a last-minute tax complication nearly derailed the deal, I already had the fix. Quietly submitted. No fanfare. Just a resolution in the folder they didn't know I still had access to. Wilcox called me personally. "You saved it," he said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Another time, a senior consultant named Darren launched a whisper campaign against a rising female associate, Celia. "She's too green. She's emotional. She only got here because of..." You can guess the rest. I didn't confront him. I let him hang himself. Pulled old emails. Compiled evaluations. Built a silent wall of proof that he was not only sexist, but sloppy. I waited until the board reviews. Then with a subtle, "You may want to read this first," I passed the packet to Wilcox's assistant. Celia got her promotion. Darren was offered a transition plan. And no one mentioned my name. Except Celia. She just nodded once across the hallway. It was enough. You see, winning the war isn't about headlines. It's about permanence. Anyone can make a splash. I was building the current, the thing that moves everything without being seen. And by now people knew you don't cross the current. You ride it or you drown. There were still those who tried to challenge me. Usually newer hires still full of swagger and empty of tact. One, a data director named Rafe, made the mistake of excluding me from a major compliance thread. I didn't think she was part of the core team, he said. That was Monday. By Thursday, the entire compliance structure had shifted. And Rafe. He was reassigned to vendor coordination. No one said why, but he stopped saying my name after that. Not long after, Trisha, my closest ally in legal, invited me for lunch again. This time, she said something I'll never forget. "Vivian, you don't just navigate power, you curate it." I laughed. But she was right. I wasn't collecting favors anymore. I was distributing consequence. If you rose, it was because I made space for you. If you fell, it was because I stopped holding the ladder. And still, I remained invisible to most. That was the beauty of it. Because when no one sees the architect, no one can tear down the design. But deep down, I wasn't doing it for them. Not for the board. Not even for the women I quietly cleared paths for. I was doing it. For her. For the girl I used to be. The one who walked into that office 20 years ago clutching a second-hand blazer and a silent dream of mattering. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted to be respected. And now they called before they acted. Paused before they spoke. Held their breath before they crossed me. The war was never loud. But I'd won it. There's a strange moment, a tipping point when fear turns to reverence. That's when they start confessing. Not because they trust you, but because they believe you already know. And they're right. It started with small things. An executive quietly closing my door behind him. A whispered, "Can I run something by you off the record?" A tearful assistant, hands shaking, asking if I thought her NDA was enforceable. They came to me not for absolution, but for protection. And I gave it. Sometimes, if they deserved it, I became their confessor. The one who didn't blink when they admitted the affair. The falsified signature. The bribe they didn't realize was a bribe. They spilled their worst parts into the air between us. And I listened. Not because I forgave them, but because I needed to know the truth if I was going to build something lasting on top of it. Power, after all, doesn't come from secrets. It comes from what you do with them. One night, Wilcox himself closed the blinds in his office and sat across from me with a glass of scotch. He didn't offer me any. I didn't ask. "There's a file," he said. "From 2004. We buried it. Should have destroyed it. But I think someone's found it." He didn't say what was in it. He didn't need to. I already knew. I had seen the file 10 years ago. I had moved it myself. "It's secure," I said. He looked relieved, almost childlike. "Good," he whispered. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't afraid of the board. He was afraid of me. They all were. But they also needed me. So they kept coming, one by one, to confess, to vent, to beg for the kind of silence I had perfected. Some offered bribes veiled as promotions, bonuses, access. I declined most. Not because I didn't want them, but because accepting made me smaller. It made me their pawn. And I had long since stopped being anyone's piece. One afternoon, a woman I barely knew, a director from the PR division, knocked on my door. She looked pale, panicked. "There's a journalist asking questions about the Geneva trip. From last year." I didn't ask why that scared her. I already knew. There had been a payout. Quiet. Discreet. Done through a proxy. But someone had traced it. And now she thought she'd be blamed. I told her exactly who to talk to, what language to use, and what not to admit. She followed my instructions. The story never ran. 2 weeks later, she sent me a thank you card with no signature. Just a pressed flower. Some people need to say thank you. Others understand the rules. I wasn't just the confessor. I had become the fixer, the firewall, the quiet force they turned to when the water was rising and no one else could swim. And yet, I still kept my name off the walls, still signed emails with V, still left the building last unnoticed, carrying nothing but my bag and a memory of every secret spoken that day. The thing is, you don't build that kind of access overnight. You earn it piece by piece, by being the one who never leaks, never flinches, never forgets. And slowly, they give you everything. Their guilt, their loyalty, their fear. It's intoxicating, but it's also dangerous, because once you become their confessor, they expect you to carry the weight of their sins. And what happens when you refuse? What happens when the confessor speaks? They panic. They attack. They try to remove you. And someone would try soon. I could feel it in the sideways glances, the nervous silences, the unsigned memos that lingered just a little too long on my desk. Someone was preparing a move. And I was ready. Because if they wanted war, they forgot who'd already won it. I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. And every confession they'd handed me was about to become my armor. They always try. Eventually, someone decides I'm too dangerous, too informed, too inconvenient. And they try to push me out. Quietly at first. Subtly. Like I wouldn't notice. But I notice everything. Always have. It started with the meeting I wasn't invited to. Every Thursday, Wilcox hosted senior leadership updates. I was always there, silent at the edge, listening. But that week, no invite. I waited, watched. And when the meeting began, I saw the door close behind a new face, a consultant from a firm we hadn't worked with in years. That was the first tremor. The second came when my calendar access was restricted. IT update, they said. But it wasn't. Then they moved my desk out of the main floor into a smaller room while renovations happened. There were no renovations. They were isolating me, testing how far they could push before I pushed back. The architect of the operation was no mystery. Adrian Vale, the new CEO, appointed 6 months earlier. A man who looked at me like I was an inherited antique, respected, but unnecessary. He'd been polite at first, courteous, but I could see the unease. He didn't like not understanding my role, didn't like that the board consulted me before him, didn't like that I knew where the bodies were buried and which ones were still breathing. So he began his campaign. Emails rerouted, meetings rescheduled. Junior staff warned not to overshare with me. The tone was clear. Freeze her out. Force her to walk away. But they didn't know me. I don't walk. I wait. And I document. By the second week, the whispers had started again. But this time, they weren't about my power. They were about my past. A rumor surfaced that I had once covered up a harassment case. False, sloppy, easy to disprove, but the fact that it surfaced at all? That was the point. Adrian was playing dirty. So I did what I always do. I watched, I waited, and then I struck. First, I pulled every internal memo he'd signed since onboarding. There, buried in a bland email from legal, was a conflict. He had authorized a consulting contract with a firm his sister owned, undisclosed, unbid, unethical. I didn't go public. I sent the memo to Trisha. Subject line: "You might want to look at this." Then I made a copy, just in case. Next, I tracked the consultant he'd brought in, the one from the Thursday meeting. Turns out he had a history. A history Adrian conveniently omitted. Whistleblower settlements, 2 firings, 1 quiet payout in Chicago. I compiled it all. Cross-referenced the firm's due diligence policy. The result, a dossier that would make a board chair lose sleep. And then, I waited. One night around 9 p.m., I heard Wilcox's door open behind me. He hadn't left for the day either. He stood there for a moment, watching me. Then he said, "You've got something, don't you?" I turned. I always do. He nodded once, and left. By the end of the month, Adrian was transitioned to a new opportunity. No public reason. Just an internal memo and a sudden vacuum. And the Thursday meetings resumed. I was invited again. Seat marked. Pen placed. Coffee poured. Like nothing had changed. Except everything had. Because now no one would try again. At least, not the old way. They understood the terrain had shifted. The shadows had grown teeth. And if you tried to exile the architect, you'd better be prepared to live in the ruins she leaves behind. I never had to raise my voice. I just had to let the silence expand and watch them fill it with their own destruction. That's exactly what happened with Adrian Vale. He thought he could outmaneuver me, outplay me, outlast me. But what he didn't realize was that the moment I stepped back was the moment he stepped into the trap. The thing with people like Adrian is that they confuse fear with obedience, and silence with submission. He assumed because I didn't retaliate loudly, I was retreating. But I don't retreat. I collect. I let him hold the knife dance in front of the mirror, with it tell himself he looked powerful, all while I was measuring where he'd eventually cut himself. It started when I noticed how often he spoke in absolutes. This will be the most efficient quarter in our history. There are no holes in our compliance. My team never makes mistakes. Those kinds of statements. They're not just arrogant, they're traceable. So I began digging. Not through back channels I didn't need to. He was careless. I found the breach in his procurement logs, anomalies in travel reimbursements. A PR firm paid double market rate, and half of that amount funneled back to a shell company in Delaware. All legal, maybe, but suspicious enough that if someone started asking questions, well, that someone would be me. The final thread came from someone he never even noticed. Lena, a junior associate in corporate governance, quiet, precise, overlooked. She came to me one morning, pale and trembling. Adrian asked me to backdate an internal review. She handed me the file. I didn't ask why she came to me. She knew. I took the folder, patted her hand, and said, "You did the right thing." And I meant it. Because she'd just given me the match to light the whole fuse, but I still didn't act. Not immediately. Instead, I started protecting Lena, made sure she was transferred to a different department, filed a quiet record of the incident under encrypted folders, made 3 backups, stored one in a cloud he couldn't access. Then I drafted an anonymous tip, sent it to the board's audit committee. The language was neutral vague but laced with precision. I knew the trail they'd follow, and follow it they did. Adrian didn't fall overnight. At first he held firm, held meetings, released memos, smiled too much in the elevator. But then the committee started pulling his old authorizations. They began routine inquiries, requested clarifications, asked about consulting contracts, board sign-offs, risk disclosures. I was asked to advise the internal ethics board. I was offered a temporary strategic oversight role with an open contract. Still no official title, still no spotlight. Just access, complete and total access. And the quiet knowledge that now finally, I wasn't the one navigating around the system. I was the system. They offered me the throne. Not literally. Not with a crown or ceremony, but in the only way that mattered in our world, a corner office. A new title. A salary 6 times what I started with. And most importantly, the power to say no. The offer came on a Monday. Clean envelope, no logo, just my name in ink. Inside a letter signed by the board, Executive Vice President of Strategic Integrity. A title that meant nothing and everything. I read it once, then again. Then folded it neatly and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But my heart slowed down, settled. Because I finally understood they didn't want to reward me. They wanted to contain me. Titles are walls. Salary is leash. And visibility is a cage. They didn't want me to rise. They wanted me visible enough that they could say I was one of them, while making sure I was too exposed to ever act freely again. I waited 3 days. Then I declined. Not rudely, not dramatically, just decisively. I'm more effective where I am, I wrote. And that was it. I returned to my desk, no corner view, no gold plaque, and resumed my work. And the office stopped. Not visibly, but perceptibly. A stillness, a silence, the quiet question on everyone's face. If she doesn't want the throne, what does she want? They didn't get it. I already had everything. You see, when you take the crown, you play their game. You attend the dinners. You speak on record. You wear your ambition like perfume, expensive, suffocating. But me, I was still anonymous enough to hear what they said behind closed doors. Still beneath the radar and above suspicion. Still the one they needed, even if they didn't understand why. After the offer, people approached me differently. Some with awe, some with fear. A few with envy so sharp it could cut glass. But most with respect. Not because I demanded it, because I had made myself essential, an essential people. We don't retire. We haunt. We echo in decisions long after we leave the room. We move levers so subtly that even the ones being moved think it was their idea. Wilcox, of course, didn't speak of it. Not directly. But one evening, as he passed my desk, he paused and said, "I've never seen anyone turn that down." I looked up and replied, "That's because they've never offered it to someone who didn't need it." He gave a small, hollow laugh, then kept walking. The funniest part. In the weeks that followed, I had more influence than ever. No more attempts to silence me. No more reassignment tricks. Just doors that opened before I knocked. And meetings that paused when I entered. Because now they knew I wasn't after their chair. I was the floor under it. I let them keep their titles. Let them pose on LinkedIn and polish their bios and bask in their quarterly glory. Meanwhile, I kept the documents, the knowledge, the memory, the map of everything they were too arrogant to track. They think the throne is where the power sits. But I know better. The real power is knowing when to walk away from it and still have them beg you to stay. Sometimes late at night when the office has emptied and the silence feels heavier than usual, I remember her. The girl in the blazer, secondhand. Too big in the shoulders, hair pulled tight, resume printed at the library because she couldn't afford a home printer. She sat in the lobby for 30 minutes before her first interview, afraid to speak, afraid to sweat, afraid most of all that she didn't belong. And she didn't. Not then. But she stayed. She stayed when they mispronounced her name, when they passed her over for promotions, when they praised her efficiency but never her ideas. She stayed when they laughed behind closed doors, assuming she couldn't hear. She stayed through office parties where no one asked about her weekend. She stayed when her mother died and no one noticed her eyes were swollen. She stayed when she wanted to scream, because even then, she knew. One day she wouldn't just be in the room. She'd be the reason the room existed. I remember her often now. Not with pity, with awe, because that girl with her silent fury and fragile hope is the reason I never let them break me. She knew something I didn't yet understand, that invisibility when nurtured correctly becomes power, a power they never see coming. The first time she pushed back, it was quiet. A memo she rewrote more clearly than her boss had asked for. He didn't thank her, but he used it. And when the client praised him, he beamed. She just watched. Filed it away. Another tally on a list only she could see. That girl, she's still in me. Still the reason I double-check everything. Still the voice that whispers, they don't believe in you, so make it impossible for them to deny you. Still the pulse behind my calm. Still the steel in my voice when I say no. The world isn't built for girls like her. It's built to chew them up, sand them down, smooth them into something softer, more palatable. But she refused. And so did I. And now they drink from mugs I ordered, sit at tables I stabilized, sign deals I orchestrated. They think they've built empires. But the girl in the blazer, she's been the architect all along. I never needed them to know my name. I needed them to remember what happens when they underestimate someone quiet, someone who listens, someone who survives, because survival is its own language, one they never bothered to learn. The girl in the blazer still walks beside me, not behind, beside. And now, she wears black heels that don't click unless she wants them to. She walks into rooms and no longer wonders if she belongs. She knows. Because every ceiling that tried to crush her, she turned into a floorboard and stood taller on it. There's a moment you think you'll never need. You tell yourself you're past it, above it, immune, recognition. But when it happens, truly happens, it doesn't feel like a reward. It feels like justice. It happened in the middle of the annual leadership summit. A ballroom too cold, too bright, filled with linen-covered tables and the scent of ambition. Everyone was there, the executives, the upstarts, the carefully groomed successors, each draped in titles and expectations, and me, sitting in the third row where I always sat, not front and center, not hidden either, just close enough to see everything and far enough to pretend I wasn't watching. Wilcox walked on stage last, late as usual, like he was waiting for the room to miss him before he arrived. His speech was predictable. Yearly numbers, milestones, strategic growth jargon dressed up in warmth. But toward the end, he paused, took off his glasses, looked out at the crowd, and said, "There's someone here tonight without whom most of us wouldn't be in this room." Silence. The truth is, she's not listed on most of the press releases. She doesn't chase credit. She doesn't need applause. He looked straight at me. But I think we've taken her quiet for granted long enough. He turned slightly and said it. My name. Vivian Harrow. Clear. Deliberate. Loud. The room stilled. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Some looked confused, who others startled her, but many nodded. And one by one they rose. A standing ovation, not demanded, not orchestrated, earned. I didn't stand, didn't cry, didn't even shift. I just nodded once. Because this wasn't a coronation, it was a reckoning. They had finally said the name that held up their system. And now it echoed. After the applause faded, after Wilcox stepped down, people began to approach me like I'd aged a decade in their eyes, but somehow become sharper. Some shook my hand. Some asked if I would consider mentoring. Others just stood beside me, awkwardly, waiting for me to say something profound. I didn't. Because the most powerful people in the room are always the ones who speak least, and I had nothing left to prove. Later that night in the hallway, a woman I barely knew, someone from HR maybe, walked beside me. She said quietly, "My daughter's starting her first job next week. She's scared. Thinks she needs to be small to survive." She paused, her voice catching. "I'm going to tell her about you." That was the moment I almost cried. Because power isn't in the titles or the rooms you control. It's in the people you quietly inspire just by surviving. I went home after midnight. I poured a glass of wine, sat in silence, let the night hum around me. And then I pulled out a box from the back of my closet, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside, a navy blazer, faded, too big in the shoulders. I had worn it to my first interview, had to borrow it from a neighbor. She said it made me look the part. I didn't know what the part was then. Now I did. It wasn't about the blazer. It was about how long I'd been willing to wear it until it finally fit. I held it in my lap, feeling the weight of every overlooked hour stitched into the fabric. That girl, the one who sat in lobbies too long, who spoke too softly, who memorized every manager's coffee order so they might remember her name. She had stayed. Stayed when she was excluded. Stayed when her ideas were stolen. Stayed when others rose by stepping on her shoulders. She stayed. And now she was the reason the ceiling broke. It's easy to forget your beginning when you become a fixture. They see the sharp lines now. The unshakable calm. The steady voice that slices through noise. They don't see the years behind it. The woman who spent hours studying board minutes just to understand how decisions were really made. The woman who watched and listened and recorded not in files, but in memory. The woman who never asked for permission because she knew it wouldn't come. So she took space, silently, until it became hers. They say, history is written by the victors, but power is rewritten by the invisible. The ones who never got the press releases, the ones who were just assistants, the ones who sat in corners and took notes until the moment came when everyone else forgot who actually kept the room running. And when that moment comes, their name isn't just remembered, it's realized. After the summit, I received 3 emails offering to celebrate me. Lunches, panels, a feature in the internal newsletter. I declined them all. Because I didn't need to be celebrated. I needed them to understand. The name they finally said was always there. On every document. Behind every success. In every silence they mistook for agreement. Now they knew. And that was enough. In the weeks that followed, I watched the shift. Junior employees began calling me Ms. Harrow, not coldly, respectfully. They stopped asking what I did. They asked how I knew. I told them what no one told me. Don't wait for credit. Learn how to move quietly and hold your ground when it matters. Most of them nodded. One asked, "How do you know when it matters?" I smiled. "You'll feel it. Right behind your ribs." Recognition is a strange thing. You think it'll feel like triumph, but it feels more like release. Like you've been holding your breath for years and someone finally says, "You were right to stay. Not perfect, not flawless, but right." I've been in rooms where people made decisions worth millions and none of them noticed the woman adjusting the calendar. I've seen men fall because they underestimated the assistant who could type 90 words per minute and remember every conflict of interest in the company's history. I've seen the quiet rise like fog and surround a building until no one knew how to breathe without it. I've seen myself. Now they see me too. I didn't change because they noticed me. They noticed me because I changed. Because I stopped waiting, stopped explaining, stopped apologizing. And when I stopped all that, they had to adjust or get left behind. They used to whisper, "She's always around." Now they whisper, "She's the reason everything works." And they're both true, because I was always around. And I am the reason, not because I took the spotlight, because I rewired the stage lights until they couldn't shine without me. And when they finally asked who flipped the switch, they said my name, Vivian Harrow, and it rang like a bell that had been waiting to toll. They offered me a seat at the table, not because they thought I needed it, because they realized they couldn't keep moving without me. But by then, I had already built my own table, one they didn't even know existed. And it had more power than all their boardrooms combined. It started with a subtle shift in tone. Not in policies, not in structure, but in the way they looked at me as if I had slipped through the walls they built, and now they weren't sure what to do with me. I became a presence, not a person. A question they didn't know how to answer. A problem they couldn't label without exposing their own weaknesses. The more they tried to define me, the more I became everything they feared, uncontainable. I declined their offer, of course. The executive title, the corporate bio, the spotlight they now pretended was mine to accept. I turned it down with grace and silence. And that silence spoke louder than any yes I could have given. Power is not something you seize. It's something you stop chasing. And when you do, when you stop needing it, the world gets nervous. Because people who no longer seek power are the ones most capable of wielding it. From the outside, nothing changed. I still walked the same hallways, still carried a leather notebook instead of a company-issued laptop, still wore quiet colors and let louder voices fill the rooms first. But the undercurrent shifted. People began to pause when they passed me, hesitate before speaking over me, listen more carefully when I did speak. And I used that hesitation not as a shield, but as a doorway, one they had unknowingly left open. You see, when you've been invisible long enough, you start to understand how visibility works. It's not about being seen. It's about deciding when and by whom you'll allow yourself to be seen. So I chose my moments like chess pieces, a comment in a meeting that shifted the outcome, a quiet correction of a dangerous assumption, a pointed question in a quarterly review that derailed an unethical plan. And every time I did, they noticed. And every time they noticed, they remembered who had let them forget me for so long. People began coming to me privately, junior staff, senior directors, even board members, not with demands, with confessions. Things they couldn't say in front of each other, deals they didn't want to unravel, fears they couldn't admit publicly. And I listened. Not because I needed leverage, I already had it. I listened because listening is power, and no one knew how to do it anymore. There's a strange loneliness in influence. You stop being invited to gossip. You stop being underestimated. But you also stop being casual. Every interaction is weighted, every word dissected, every silence read like a forecast. But I welcomed it, because it meant I had become something more than a fixture. I had become an institution. Still, I knew it wouldn't last forever. Power isn't immortal. It requires adaptation, renewal, quiet revolutions. So I began to look carefully for someone else, not a replica, an evolution. She was 2 floors down, young mid-30s, dark curls she wore natural despite the unspoken dress code. She moved fast but never ran, spoke rarely but never stumbled. Her name was Elise. I watched her the way I had once been watched, with quiet scrutiny and private hope. At first, she didn't see me. She saw what I allowed her to see: an older woman with no title, no schedule, always observing but never interrupting. Then one day in a shared elevator, she turned and asked, "You used to be an exec, right?" I smiled. "No, I just used to be underestimated." She blinked, and I saw it, that flicker of recognition, the spark, the understanding that there was something behind the curtain she hadn't known to look for. And I knew. She was ready. I started small. I looped her into a last-minute strategy meeting, had her take notes not for me, but for herself, gave her access to a document she didn't ask for, told her to read it twice and say nothing yet. A week later, she came back with questions no one else had thought to ask. I gave no praise, just said, "You'll need thicker shoes. These hallways wear you down." She smirked. But she showed up the next day in boots instead of heels. Smart girl. I taught her the first rule: know what they think you don't know. The second rule: let them believe they're in control even when you're pulling the strings. The third: never ask for permission to do what you already know is right. Elise absorbed them like scripture, and she used them, quietly, efficiently, and without apology. She didn't seek attention, but people began noticing her anyway, and not just noticing, recalculating, the same way they had with me. One afternoon, she came to my desk with a folder. Said nothing. I opened it. Inside, a proposed restructure I'd been orchestrating from the shadows but never put on paper. She had mapped it. Every department, every redundancy, every long overdue cut. I looked up. She met my gaze. "You're not subtle," I said. She shrugged. "I thought you already trained me out of subtlety." I didn't smile, but my heart did. That night, I walked the halls one last time after hours, stopped by the server room, the records department, the meeting rooms where I'd once fetched coffee, carried cables, arranged seats no one offered me. Every space bore traces of me now, not visible, but felt. Like fingerprints on glass, like heat after a fire. And I knew what had to come next. Power isn't about holding the reins forever. It's about knowing when to let go. Because the real test of your influence isn't what happens when you're there. It's what continues when you're not. And Elise. She would continue it. Not in my shadow, in her own light. I left her a letter. No praise. No sentimentality. Just, you don't owe them visibility. You owe them results. When they try to name you, define yourself first. Be water. And when the crown is offered, walk away. I signed it with nothing but my initials. She'd know. In the days that followed, I stepped back. Let Elise speak more. Let her interrupt me in meetings even when she was wrong. Let her correct herself. Let her lead. And when people asked me what I was planning next, I just said, "I'm preparing to disappear." They thought I meant retirement, but I meant something else entirely. When you live long enough in the shadows, you start to understand visibility is a gamble, but presence, true strategic presence, is eternal. I didn't need to be remembered by name. I needed to be remembered by effect. And that was already in motion. They don't realize it yet. But Elise is already rearranging their universe. She's rewriting the rules in lowercase letters, subtle changes that will one day become doctrine. She's not a version of me. She's better. Because she's starting from a place I had to claw my way into. And that's legacy. People think power is kept in vaults, stored in corner offices, written into contracts. It's not. It's passed hand to hand, whispered into ears, written in margin notes, coded in trust. And I've passed it. Not with applause, with intention. I sit now by the window, mornings spent with tea and silence. And when I close my eyes, I don't see the building. I see the scaffolding beneath it. Every quiet word, every redirection, every plan disguised as a favor. And I smile. Because I didn't just change my life, I changed theirs. And now someone else is pulling the strings and no one even knows where they're attached. Perfect. It was a Wednesday. No one ever expects endings on a Wednesday. That's why I chose it. No symbolism, no dates to commemorate, no announcements that could be gossiped about in elevators. Just a clean break at 7:43 a.m. with a single email. Subject: my transition, I've arranged for everything. Effective immediately. Thank you for the years. VH. No signature, no logo, no sentiment. Just truth. And in my world, truth is the rarest luxury of all. I had already packed the night before. There wasn't much: a notebook, an old pen, one plant that had somehow survived 6 years of neglect, and a folded photo of a woman in a too large blazer. The photo wasn't framed. It was worn at the corners, stained with time, and crumpled slightly from having been pressed between legal pads in drawer after drawer. But it was mine, and it was the only thing I didn't take with me. I pinned it to the wall before I left, right next to the light switch, so that when someone finally turned it off, they'd have to look at her first. Not out of respect, out of curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, they'd wonder, who was she? And maybe one of them would answer without even knowing. The reason everything worked. I walked out quietly the way I'd entered the place years ago, unnoticed, uncelebrated. But that was the point. I had never needed a standing ovation. I had never waited for a nameplate. I had become something better than visible. I had become permanent. I stopped halfway down the building steps and looked up. It wasn't sentiment that made me pause. It was relief. Because this time the structure wasn't mine to hold anymore. The scaffolding I'd spent years building, the invisible beams of influence, the secret blueprints, the contingency plans no one else knew existed, were all still there. But now someone else knew where to find them. Elise. She wouldn't repeat what I'd done. She'd expand it. Not with my voice, with her own. And that made me feel something I hadn't in decades. Safe. People started calling around noon, at first cautiously. Just wanted to check if everything's okay. Then more urgently. Wait, is this real? By evening, I stopped answering altogether. Because once you've let go of the reins, the worst thing you can do is run back to the stables. And besides, I knew they'd survive. They just didn't know it yet. I spent my first morning of freedom in a public park. Not the kind with tourists and food trucks, the kind with iron benches and old trees, the kind where retirees read quietly and mothers chased toddlers across grass. I sat with my coffee, one hand resting on a fresh notebook. Not to write, to feel the weight of it. To remind myself that I could still fill pages if I chose to. But for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to, because I had already written the story that mattered. And it wasn't on paper. It was in people. Over the following weeks, I began to see the ripple. Someone forwarded me an internal memo that Elise had restructured, entirely stripped of jargon, stripped of fluff. Just clarity. I smiled. Because clarity was always the most dangerous gift you could offer a corporation. It left no room to hide. A month after my exit, I bumped into someone from procurement at the grocery store. They said, "You were the ghost." I blinked. The ghost? Yeah. Everyone knew you were there, but no one really saw you. Until suddenly you were gone and the whole place felt colder. They laughed, embarrassed. I mean that as a compliment. I did too. Because ghosts don't haunt for attention. They haunt for remembrance. That night, I sat on my porch, legs tucked beneath me, and allowed myself to feel the thing I had kept at bay for years. Peace. Not happiness. Happiness is a firework, loud, brief, and unpredictable. Peace is the moment after the echo dies down, the quiet after the orchestra ends, The hush that tells you the story finished the way it was supposed to. I got a letter one day. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was young. Neat. Slightly shaky. It read, "I never met you, but I work for Elise now. She talks about you like a myth. I don't know if you'll read this, but thank you. You made space for women like me, the ones who don't shout. And now, we don't have to." I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I folded it gently and slid it into my old notebook. Because legacy isn't about your name being remembered, it's about someone else no longer needing to apologize for who they are. A few months passed. Elise sent one email. Just one. Subject thought. "You'd appreciate this." They invited me to the board retreat. I declined. No explanation, no follow-up. I laughed for a full minute. Then I replied, "Proud of you. Never forget. The power isn't in the room, it's in deciding when not to walk in." I don't go back. I don't hover near the office or reach out to check in. Because I meant it. When I walked away, I walked. Not out of anger, but because real leaders know when they're no longer needed, and they leave before the world begs them to. People ask me now, "What are you doing with your time?" And I say, "Watching everything I built grow without me." It confuses them, but that's because they think power only exists while you hold it. They don't understand that the most dangerous kind of power is the one you can walk away from, and still feel it ripple for years. Do I miss it sometimes? I miss the thrill of a strategic win, the kind no one else even realized was a battle. I miss watching a plan unfold across departments like a slow-burning fire. I miss the hush that followed when I cleared my throat in a meeting. But mostly, I don't miss the weight. Because I carried it for decades. And now it's theirs to carry lighter because I taught them how. My final move wasn't a resignation. It was a reset. For them. For the system. For the culture that had quietly eaten away at too many good people for too long. I didn't burn it down. I rewired it, so that the next person walking in from the shadows wouldn't have to work so hard to be seen. There's a quiet thrill in becoming irrelevant on your own terms, because you're not irrelevant to everyone, just to those who once overlooked you, and their irrelevance was always mutual. I still walk past the building sometimes. Not to reminisce, to test myself, to see if I feel the urge to walk back in. I never do. Because I left at the exact right time, the moment after the climax but before the credits rolled. That's the hardest part. Most people overstay their arc. I chose to exit while the story still had room for sequels. And when I walk past and see someone new, someone younger, someone nervous fumbling with their badge at the front gate, I want to say, keep going. Keep watching. You're being underestimated right now. Use it. But I don't. Because she doesn't need me. She needs room. The kind of room I spent years building. And she's already walking into it. I didn't become powerful by raising my voice. I became powerful by raising my standards and holding the room to them. And now I don't need a voice at the table. Because I helped build the room the table sits in. And I know who's sitting there now. And that's enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated, this is your reminder. You don't need permission to matter. You don't need applause to be right. And you don't need a crown to pull the strings. Just patience, strategy, and silence used wisely. So to every woman who's still waiting to be seen, you already are. Even if they don't know it yet. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your own. Drop a comment. Share your story. And remember, the shadows aren't a punishment. They're where the most powerful work begins.